Recording engineer Julie Last has been active in the music recording business for more than 25 years. She joined New York City's Record Plant Studios in the mid-1970s as one of only a handful of women who fought their way into the control rooms of major recording studios. She worked on albums with seminal rock bands including John Lennon, Aerosmith, Talking Heads, Cheap Trick, Lou Reed, The Clash and Brian Eno, and after moving to Los Angeles, went on to work with Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Sean Colvin and Ricky Lee Jones. Hi Julie, thank you so much for being part of this Bearsville music series. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Lizzie. It's so nice to be here.
Can you tell me how you got started in the 1970s in New York?
Yes, well, I was always a music lover and a music maker, and I used to obsessively look at the album covers when there were albums, and I'd read the credits, and I loved to see who the musicians were and where they were recorded and what studios and who the engineers were, and I loved all the details and was so interested in the craft of how people made records.
So you decided at an early age that you wanted to become...
Well, I don't think I said at any point, I'm going to be an engineer and a producer. It was more, I want to learn how people do this thing that I love.
Yes.
And when I would listen to records, sometimes I'd just get lost in the music, but sometimes part of my brain would be thinking, why did they choose that instrument? Why did they decide this part? Why is it going from the chorus to the bridge? Why are those what are those harmony vocals? I'd be analyzing and dissecting the music and the way the records were made. And so when I went to New York, I got this idea that I would like to get a job in a studio so I could really find out how they did that. Both because I was interested, but also as a musician, I wanted to learn so I could do it for myself. There was a little bit of a selfish motivation there. And I wandered the streets of New York, not wandered, but I targeted the places I wanted to go, and I called them and I made appointments, and I went to studio after studio after studio. And most of the places I went to just looked at me like I was crazy because there were no women doing this back then. Sometimes they'd say, well, we have a nice receptionist job for you. Wouldn't you like that? No, it would be no, thank you.
Classic.
So one day I wandered into the record plant, which was the biggest studio in New York at the time. They were doing all the seminal rock and roll records that were coming out of New York. And they had a woman manager, and she looked at me and she said, well, I don't think you're going to last 2 weeks, but come back tomorrow. And I did, and I came back the next day and the next day and the next day and just did whatever they threw at me, from making coffee to sweeping the floors to going to get lunch for the artists to setting up microphones to carrying the tapes to everything. They called the the beginners. They called us generals because we would just generally do anything anybody asked us to do. And I loved it. And I just felt like I'm going to prove this is possible, and I'm going to do it better than anybody else. And there was nobody that put that pressure on me but myself.
You were the only woman as a general?
I was the only woman as a general. And really in New York at that time, there were only 2 other women recording engineers, but I didn't even know that.
Wow.
So I just worked really hard, and little by little I got more and more responsibility, and people started to take me seriously and saw that I was passionate and committed. And one of the main producers that was doing a lot of work at the studio saw my dedication and started requesting me on his projects. And that became a real mentorship collaboration. And his name was Jack Douglas. He was doing the Aerosmith records and Cheap Trick and Patti Smith and all kinds of fantastic records. And when he got hired to do John Lennon's Double Fantasy with Yoko, he brought me with him to a different studio to be the
Right.
assistant engineer on that record.
What is it like as a woman on the production side of the business when there is maybe just you, no other women in the studio? Do you get treated as one of the boys, or did you find that people were making exceptions or not giving you access to the network?
Early on, there were times when someone might have been reluctant to give me responsibility, but I always had this commitment that I was going to change their mind.
Yes.
And not in any, militant way. I just said to myself, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do it as well as I can. And I'm going to see if I can kind of bring them around.
Yes.
And more often than not, it just became a non-issue.
Yes. Yes.
So there was resistance. I could feel it, but it was not overt. And when I eventually could bring someone around to seeing, oh, this person is really an asset, then that was always sort of a triumph.
That's great. Of the artists that you worked with in New York City, which ones did you enjoy working with the most?
One in particular I might tell you about was I was working as an assistant engineer on a Michael Jackson record. This was in LA. And Michael had 3 different teams of producer engineers, 3 different studios. He was paying for a lockout rate in every single one of them, every day. So we would show up, I was the assistant, we would show up and just wait around. Sometimes he would come and sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes he'd get some of the other studio and he'd show up for a little while or not at all. And there was one day we were waiting, me and the producer engineer, just the 2 of us, and it just felt like Michael wasn't going to come that day. So the engineer left to go get lunch. And he was gone only a few minutes when Michael showed up. And he said, put up the tape of this song. I'm going to do a vocal today. And he didn't even ask where the other guy was. So I put up the tape. And we had a microphone already ready to go for him. And he went out and he performed this song. I set it all up. It was all ready to go. Rolled the tape. And he performed like he was at Madison Square Garden in front of thousands of people. He was dancing. He was whooping. He was so into it. And it was just him and me. And I'll just
Amazing.
Never forget that.
Tell me about working with Joni Mitchell.
She had booked the studio. I was in the office when the call came in, and I saw the manager write in this big scheduling book. I saw her write Joni Mitchell. I was looking over her shoulder, and I just dropped to my knees. I said, please put me on that project. I'll do anything. Let me work on that record. So I got to be assigned to be the assistant engineer on that. And I was so intimidated by her. She was my hero, I had loved her music. It was such an influence. And so when she first came in, I was very nervous, but she was just so approachable and so friendly and easy to talk to. One thing I remember about Joni is that she was willing to go down paths just to see where they would take her. And even if it was a dead end, it would inform the next turn. So she was always willing to try things musically and lyrically. And, not everything she did made the final cut, but it was interesting to watch her process. I did several records with her at her home studio, and we had done the CD, a preliminary CD, which she labored over the sequence. Every day we'd try a different order of the songs. She finally got a sequence she liked, and she took it to David Geffen, who put it in his CD player, and the CD player was on shuffle. So everything that we had worked so hard to get exactly right, the flow of the record, was completely different, and she wasn't happy about that. And when she complained to him, he said something like, "Oh, you're lucky you're even making records anymore. You're at old news." She came back to the studio after this meeting so upset, so angry, and I think it was partly her motivation for wanting to do records on her own and not to be beholden to somebody writing a check and telling her what to do. Yeah. Although nobody ever really told her what to do.
Yeah. Which album was that?
That was called Night Ride Home.
And I remember she did a lot of the artwork for the album covers as well herself.
Yes, she did.
Painter.
While we were working on one of them, Joni was painting the cover, and she would disappear into another room to paint. And it was a representation of Van Gogh's portrait of himself with her face inserted where Van Gogh's face was. Yeah. And she had a table with a picture of the painting, the original painting, and a mirror, and her canvas and her paints. And every day she would work on it. And some days we'd be looking around like, where's Joni? She would be gone painting. We'd have to drag her back into the studio, and the painting evolved. It was beautiful to watch it coming to life. And every day toward the end of the record, she'd say, "It's done."
Yes.
And then the next day we'd be going, "Where's Joni?"
She's working on it.
She'd be back, like doing something.
And you knew that it was going to be on the cover of the album.
Yes, yeah.
So finally, is there one piece of advice that you would give to a young woman starting out, wanting to get into the music business today?
I would just say, have confidence in yourself and know that that there's no one that can stop you but yourself. And if you believe in what you're doing and you love it and you want it, it'll happen. So just don't give up.
That's great. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
being part of Backstage at Bearsville.
Thank you so much.